Boy, that was awfully good. Want me to turn that off?
Well, he's recording, you know.
All right, we are in Parshat Ki Tetze. Ki Tetze contains many mitzvot in it. We're going to focus on one, and that is the mitzvah of Ma'akeh, which is translated as a parapet, I think is how we pronounce it.
Parapet.
Parapet. A fence around, I think specifically around a roof, right? That accurate definition of a parapet? We'll go with it. Everyone's muted. So a few different angles that we're going to take with this. The first is just to look at the psukim and an interesting observation inspired by the Ibn Ezra. So the Torah tells us as follows: Ki tivneh bayit chadash ve'asita ma'akeh legagecha ve'lo tasim damim beveitecha ki pol hanofel mimenu, which is translated here: when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it. And then immediately following it, Lo tizra karmecha kilayim pen tikdash hamleah hazera asher tizra utvata kerem. You're not allowed to plant kilayim, which is a mixture of different species growing together, both in your vineyard and in your field. Lo tacharosh b'shor u'b'chamor yachtav. You cannot put an ox and a donkey together in the same plow. Lo tilbash shatnez semer ufishtim yachtav. Nor can you wear shatnez, wool and linen together, which seem to be total non sequiturs. What does the mitzvah of a ma'akeh, of a fence, have to do with all these instances of kilayim, which follow, and shatnez, which follow immediately afterwards? Seems to be just a random list of mitzvot that happen to be following one after another. And in Parshat Ki Tetze, we have this a lot. Rashi at the very beginning tells us the parsha opens with the mitzvah, or hard to call it a mitzvah, but the description of Isha Yifat Toar. And he goes down and shows how everything that follows is kind of a direct chain, right? If you take this woman in, then you're going to hate her, then you're going to come to divorce her, etc., etc. That there's a lot of attempts, specifically in Parshat Ki Tetze, to connect the dots between what seem to be random mitzvot. So the even as
there's only one. There's one positive one.
What's that?
Only one in the listing of that, and all the others are negatives.
Yeah. So, and that's an interesting point also, Arthur, is exactly how, right, we're focusing on Ma'akeh and how many mitzvot are there here. We'll get there in a little while. That it's not so clear, but you're right. On the surface, it seems that this is a positive followed by several negatives. The Ibn Ezra says that actually they're all connected. How are they connected? Ki tivneh bayit chadash nidbeka zot parsha achar shenilchamu behem be'eretz hachol achel b'mitzvat habayit. Says that these are all kind of logical steps of what's going to happen. They're going to come into the land. They're going to wage war. They're going to win the war. And once they win the war and they settle down, the first thing they're going to do is build a home. And then they'll plant their fields and they'll work their fields. And so he says it's kind of all connected, that it falls under the general heading of building a new house, because all the prohibitions of shatnez and kilayim kind of logically follow once you have a home established. Once you have a new house, then you have to be concerned about what's growing in the field, how you're working the field, which animals you're using together, etc., etc. That's what the Ibn Ezra says. In a shir posted on the virtual Beit Midrash from Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rabbi Michael Hatton makes an interesting observation. He says that when we think about the prohibition of kilayim, right? About the prohibition of mixing diverse seeds, about mixing animals together on the plow. Those are seemingly, maybe we can argue when it comes to the animals, but that these generally are assumed to be paradigmatic examples of a chok, of mitzvot that we generally say have no logical basis for them. And we can argue whether there is logical basis or not for the prohibition of kilayim, of mixing species, right? We can think of some good reasons why maybe that should be a prohibition, and maybe it's not entirely illogical or without explanation, without rationale. But he says that these are given as examples of a chok, of mitzvot for which we don't have a rational explanation. Certainly, when it comes to shatnez, to wearing wool and linen, that seems to be a given, right? So, since they're a chok or divine decree that are seemingly not animated by any obvious or readily comprehensible rationale, they must therefore be performed as acts of faith at the behest of the sovereign God who so requires. On the other hand, our mitzvah of ma'akeh is the most logical mitzvah there is, right? The imperative to erect an enclosing rail to prevent mishap in the home is so eminently reasonable as to be practically superfluous, a perfect example of a Torah command that requires no further explanation as justification for its fulfillment. This rather jarring juxtaposition of inverses can therefore perhaps be additionally understood as an emphatic exclamation. The ultimate authority for all of the Torah's commands, whether rational or super-irrational, derives not from the mortal human mind that is frequently and famously preoccupied with innumerable pretexts to render the most pressing of moral pronouncements non-binding, but rather from the absolute and morally uncompromising God, the same God who enjoins the fulfillment of non-rational decrees that cannot be so easily dismissed. Okay, so he takes this as kind of proof that, this is relating back to what we did last week with the question of whether we can delve into trying to get at Ta'amei HaMitzvot, any rationale or explanation for the mitzvot. So he says, right, a very common message when these questions are asked is that, the fact that these are grouped together under one general heading of rules of the house show that it's not so simple, and we can't assume that there are some mitzvot that make sense, some that don't make sense, but rather it's proof and support that everything comes from God and that we have to do it simply because God told us to do it without any basis of human rationale or logic. It's just an interesting way of beginning to think about it, right? Whether they really are connected or not is one question, but if we accept Ibn Ezra, I thought this was an interesting way of thinking and framing it. Any questions or comments on what we've seen so far?
Would genetically modified agricultural products, whether animals or grains or fruit, fall under the heading of kilayim?
Yeah, so that's a big question that's that modern day science is putting to the halachic world, is what do we do with these genetically modified food items? What do we do with animal
Hybrids.
meat grown in petri dishes, hybrid fruits, right? Clementines and tangelos, and what are pomelo, right? All sorts. I'm only in the citrus family, but they're all over the place, right? You have all sorts of hybrids. So there's a rich halachic discussion about this. Generally, right? I forget the exact. I'm not really holding strongly in this, but meaning if it's in the same general species, the same general category, right? Like mixing different types of oranges is okay. But it's if you mix an orange and a grapefruit where you get into some questions. And everyone agrees it's only a problem for Jewish farmers. But if a non-Jewish farmer grows something that would be kilayim, there's no issue with Jews eating it. It's only a prohibition for Jews.
When was that ruling?
When was that ruling?
Yeah, see, it seems to me that this is one thing that has very, very, very much been sort of denied, because we eat all sorts of stuff that's been combinations.
Right, and we do
Kilayim.
so because we assume that that it's not grown by Jewish farmers. Right. There's another question. Right. Once the new breed has been created, right. Once you have seeds of pomelo, so then maybe planting it isn't a problem. It's only the first generation or the first act of combining. So Israel has a robust pomelo economy, and there's not real issue with it. But meaning it goes, these discussions go back a long time. The Daf Yomi is learning Masechet Sukkah, and the whole question about purity of etrog species is a huge question. And right, the reason why etrogim are so expensive is because we pay to ensure that it's bilti chashash mirukav, that there is no concern whatsoever of mixing of species, that these are pure etrog lines that we're buying, and that there's no other species being mixed. Robert, you were asking more specifically about genetically modified food. So that's not mixing together of different species. That's kind of putting things under a magnifying glass. So there are those who want to claim that it's the same. Again, if we say that kilayim is a chok without any rationale, then you can't make this argument. But if you say that the reason for kilayim is that we don't want to mess with God's world in the way in which God intended fruits and vegetables to grow and to be cultivated, so then perhaps if you genetically modify it, whether it's with a different species or in a lab setting, maybe you're overriding the purpose of the prohibition, which is to enjoy food in its natural state. And so there is a rich discussion about that, right? There's another rich discussion about the status of lab-grown meats and whether it has a status of fleischiks or not. There's a whole, these questions are never ending, and they just keep increasing as the technology that we have in our world continues to expand the possibilities.
There's no condemnation in Scripture about breeding mules, is there? That they just seem, their existence just seems to be taken for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be a problem to actually breed it, but their existence is certainly taken for granted. Okay, so anyway, that was an interesting introduction to this notion of ma'akeh, right? That is it connected to what else is going on in the parsha or not? And with this insight of Rabbi Haddon, I just wanted to point out something interesting that that comes up in the Chaye Adam by Danziger, who wrote one of the popular halachic guidebooks post Shulchan Aruch, but very popular, very often followed. And it had there, as we'll see, there's echoes of this in the Rambam. The Chaye Adam has in halacha, it's section 15 of his work. The heading is Hilchot Mezuzah u'Ma'akeh, laws of mezuzah and ma'akeh. Really, he only talks about laws of mezuzah. He gives, he is one of the first sources that give the custom that many of us have or see of kissing the mezuzah when coming in and out of a home, in and out of a room here. But he gives the category of hilchot mezuzah u'ma'akeh, right? And so many want to say that this is conceptually, he's placing ma'akeh as kind of a rule for the house, right? Kind of just like a mezuzah defines and identifies a home as a Jewish home, a ma'akeh might play the same role. That we think we know the exact reason, that it's to prevent anyone falling off the roof, and that certainly is the most commonly accepted understanding of it, as we'll see, but that there might be something else going on as well, that this might be another way of establishing a home as a Jewish home. It's sort of an identifying marker, which is just interesting to think about, and we'll keep this in mind when we get to the Rambam in a couple of minutes.
There are overhead pictures of parts of Baghdad.
Okay.
And one in particular is in a film called The Forgotten Refugees. people are interviewing one of the people involved in the evacuation of Jews from Iraq. He grew up in Baghdad, and he describes how life was very good in many ways for the community, but then there was a problem of a pogrom called the Farhud in 1940, I think, and people fleeing from their homes. And he says in his family's case, they went up to the roof and they jumped from one house to another because they were built relatively close together. And the roofs are flat. And I don't think I recall seeing railings or parapets as part of the standard design.
Interesting. That sounds like an academic paper there, Robert.
Yeah.
All right, we equally are weighted. Yeah, that's really interesting. Certainly,
That could cut down on theft.
right.
Perhaps.
Right. Certainly, you know, we're not going to get into many of the nitty gritty details, but there's a robust discussion about when a roof requires a ma'akeh, and if it's a sloped roof, you know, the overwhelming consensus is there is no requirement, and how much. You know, there's a lot of questions about how much of a slope and how steep, etc. But certainly, a flat roof would require a ma'akeh. Interestingly, though, the height requirement for the ma'akeh is not so great.
Yeah, flat roof.
So it could be that even with a halachically valid ma'akeh, one could still easily jump over it. And whether that defeats the purpose or not is a separate, obviously related question. That is really interesting. That would be an interesting academic exercise to go back and look at Jewish homes in various communities through over history and see if they had ma'akeh or not, and try to understand why not. Could be a good project. All right, so let's move on to the Sefer Chinuch. I apologize because I'm in camp. I couldn't print out my source sheet, so I can't read from the Hebrew and show you the English. So we'll try to keep us both in the screen for as long as we can. And when we can't anymore, then we'll just maybe jump down to the English. So the Sefer Chinuch tells us, Mitzvat ha'ma'akeh, v'hachsir ha'michsholim v'hanigafim mikol mishkanotenu, v'al ze ne'emar v'asita ma'akeh legagecha. Completely opposite of what we've just said. He says the mitzvah is to remove all harm, all potential causes of danger or injury from our dwelling places, and that is the mitzvah of ma'akeh. Inyan hu shenivneh kir saviv hagagot v'saviv habarot v'hashichin v'domehen kedei shelo tichshol beria lipol bahem o mehen. Right, and the requirements, the mitzvah is that we need to build a wall around roofs and around wells or pools and anything similar, so no beria, no creature, not just humans, but right, also seemingly to protect animals, so no creatures will fall into them in the case of a well or a pool or a pit, or from them in the case of a roof. Bichlal mitzvah zu livnot ulitakin kol kotel v'chol geder she'karov lavot hakala mimet. Right, so part of the mitzvah of this mitzvah is to build and establish any wall and any fence that will come close, right, where there is an opportunity or likelihood or probability of any harm coming. Why does it say make a ma'akeh, make a parapet for your roof? Because it's talking in common terms, right? Most commonly, this would manifest itself on a roof, but it certainly could be the case in a pit or a well or anything else. The lashon sifi asita ma'akeh mitzvat aseh. Okay, it's a positive command. The sharshe ha-mitzvah, the roots of the mitzvah. I don't think I can keep the Hebrew and the English for much longer. Maybe one more line. Let's just go to the English. It is from the roots of the commandments that it is, since even though God, may he be blessed, supervises the details of people's lives and knows all of their deeds, that everything that happens to them, good or bad, is through his decree and his commandments, according to their merit and their guilt. Like the matter that they may, their memory be blessed, said, a man does not so much as bruise a finger down below on earth unless it is announced above, from above in heaven. Nonetheless, a person must guard himself from the accidents that are customary in the world. As God created his world and built upon it the foundations of principles of nature, and decreed that fire should burn and that water puts out the flame, and so that nature requires that if a large stone falls on the head of a man, that it will smash his brain, or that if a person falls from on top of a high roof to the ground, that he will die. And he may he be blessed, grace the bodies of people, and blew into them a living soul with the mind to protect the bodies from all incidents, and then place the two of them, the soul and body, within the sphere of the natural elements, and these elements will move them and act upon them. Since God subjugated the human body to nature, as so did his wisdom require, from the angle of its being physical, he commanded him to guard himself from an accident. His nature to which he is subjugated will act upon him if he does not guard himself from it. This is a very philosophical introduction to a seemingly very practical and very straightforward commandment. What's going on here? Well, any thoughts as to why the Sefer Chinuch gets so philosophical and so deep about his introduction and explanation for the requirement for a ma'akeh?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear if God controls everything, why we have to make any effort to protect ourselves from accidents. And he's
Okay.
having to explain why this is so.
Okay, good. So, right, if we accept as a philosophical tenet of Judaism, of Hashgacha Pratik, that God has absolute control over everything that happens, so we could just go about and say, when it's my time, it's my time. And I don't need to do anything special to protect myself. There's no need to wear a seatbelt. There's no need to observe the speed limit. If it's time for me to die, so it's time. And if not, then God will protect me and I can drive 100 miles an hour and not wear my seatbelt, and I'll be protected, I'll be fine. So that seems to be the basis for this very lengthy introduction. Then he goes even further. However, there will be a few that the king will desire their glory due to their great piety and the clinging of their souls to his ways, may he be blessed, that they are the great pious ones who were of old the men of fame, like the great and holy forefathers and many of the sons that were after them, such as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and those similar to them, to whom God delivered nature into their hands. At their start, nature was master over them, and at their end, due to the greatness of the elevation of their souls, it was reversed, as they were the masters over nature. As we know with Abraham our father, that they dropped him in a fiery furnace and he was not injured. With the four pious ones mentioned, that they were placed in the burning fiery furnace and not a hair on their head was singed. Most people have not merited this great level due to their sins, and therefore the Torah commands us to guard our dwelling places and our locales, lest death encounter us in our negligence. We should not endanger our souls by reliance upon miracles, and they, may their memory be blessed, said that a miracle is not performed for anyone who relies on a miracle. According to this approach, will you see most matters written in every place, since even in Israel's fighting of a war commanded by the word of God, they would still organize their war and equip themselves and do all of the required matters as if they were completely relying on natural processes to win the war. So it is fitting to do according to the matter that we mentioned. The one who does not argue with the truth from a perverse heart will concede this. Okay, so the same explanation Gary gave. He says, yes, it's true. God can intervene at any place. And if really God wants me to survive and wants me to live another however many years, then even if I drive without a seatbelt and even if I drive way above the speed limit, Hashem will protect me, and that's his prerogative, so as it were. But we can never rely on such protection, right? We have to do our part. And so it almost seems as if he has to justify such a seemingly obvious act, right? There's a common explanation for the mishpatim, what we think of as the common sense mitzvot, right? We say this at the end of Mishnah study, right? Oftentimes, Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu zakot et Yisrael, God wanted to give merit to the Jewish people, therefore he gave them an abundance of mitzvot. One common explanation of what does this mean that God wanted to merit the Jewish people is that he gave us mitzvot that we would have done anyway, right? By refraining from stealing, which most of us, are good people, we don't steal. Certainly refraining from murder, most of us are not murderers. It never would have crossed our mind to, I want to murder this person, but God said I can't, so therefore I'm not. But simply by refraining, we get mitzvah credit for not committing murder, right? That's the explanation of the merit that God gave us by giving us an abundance of mitzvot, is that we were given mitzvot that we would have done anyway had they not been commanded to us. And so that seems to be what's going on with Ma'akeh. In the Sefer HaChinuch, in his lengthy introduction and explanation, seems to being maybe justifying this as one of the mitzvot, right? Something which is so patently obvious and which we would have done even had it not been commanded. He's explaining why it was commanded.
I get the impression that it's saying that Judaism is just a very positive religion.
Uh-huh. How so?
Of all these good things that we should do and, work for ourselves. And, we can't, that we have the confidence that we are instructed to do things for ourselves.
Okay. Right. It certainly is a very rational, science-based approach to how we're supposed to live our lives, and showing that Judaism is in absolute concert with the laws of nature, and that we shouldn't think that Torah, life of mitzvot, is in any way counter to the laws of nature, and that we remain subject to both.
I read something about Christianity, about some people in Christianity would just be the other way, without whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So good. So let's stay with that. Let's go on to the Rambam. I apologize. I use the website Safario to create these sources. It's a wonderful website. I highly recommend it. But there seemed to be a little kink in their system, because if you look at the translation for the Rambam, it somehow went, I think that's German. For Halacha Bet and Gimel.
Oh, right.
So we're going to stick with the Hebrew, and I'll do my best to translate, unless anyone wants to take a stab at the German. Happy to rely on your translation of the German as well, but let's stick with the Rambam in the original.
If you have a question, I'd be willing to try to answer it.
Okay, I have no idea. I mean, if you want to follow along in the German and see if I'm doing a good job, please. Mitzvata se lasot adam ma'akel gago. So it's a positive commandment, the Rambam says, for a person to make a ma'akeh, a parapet for his home, for his roof. Shne'emar v'asita ma'akel gagecha. You should make a parapet for your roof. V'hu sheyeh beit dira. Says this is true only in a place of dwelling, in a place of residence. Aval beita otzarot, beita bakar v'chayote bahen eno zakuklo. But there is no requirement for a ma'akeh in a storehouse, in a barn, in a cattle pen, or anything similar. Any home, right? I know that there is a movement of mini homes and small homes. Again, remember, I'm transmitting to you from a trailer house for the summer. Right, so there is such a movement, but if you have a very small home, less than 4 amot by 4 amot, right, and this actually becomes, in Masechet Sukkah, there is discussion about this, perhaps in the context of what constitutes a kosher sukkah. But anyway, if it's a very small place, also it is exempt from a ma'akeh. Okay, so it's interesting because here the Rambam seems to be saying, first of all, right, does this jibe with what we saw previously as far as the explanation of the mitzvah?
Not really.
Yeah, if the mitzvah is about safety, why would you not need a ma'akeh on
In a
your
tiny
warehouse or in a small house, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, if there's a danger, there's a danger, and it shouldn't matter if it's a danger in the home or a danger in the warehouse, a danger in where the cattle are. It's dangerous, and so therefore you should require a ma'akeh. But yet he says it's only limited, it's only required for the home. Okay, so this is where there might be echoes of the Chaye Adam, who says that it's not necessarily a mitzvah about safety, but it's a mitzvah about demarking a Jewish home, about somehow designating it as a Jewish space or something unique to the
We
house.
don't have a parapet.
We do, at
We
least
do?
on either side.
Um,
It's
yeah, so go walk around the neighborhood after the shiur tonight and see
We live in a house with a flat roof.
who has it and who doesn't, and maybe
We
you
do
need to
have,
put some up.
actually.
No, we don't.
When we lived
I
in
don't know how
Boston,
we'd get up to the roof except from the outside because there's no, what is it, stairwell or anything to get to
yeah,
the top.
yeah. So that is actually as you get into the halachic detail, that becomes an important discussion. If it's not accessible, maybe it's not
It
required.
isn't. Yeah.
When we lived in Boston, we redid our deck, and seemingly a deck, the railing on a deck would be the same idea as a ma'akeh. So then it became an interesting question about if you have a contractor doing all the work for you and it's kind of a work zone and you're not allowed up there, can you make the bracha? Can you, and you're paying for the mitzvah to be done, but can you have more of an active part? Is there any stage in which you can say the bracha yourself? That's another really interesting discussion about ma'akeh, right? Because most of us, any serious work done in our homes, we're going to contract that out. So that becomes another interesting question. So anyway, but the Rambam seems here to be saying that it's a mitzvah on the house specifically, and not necessarily about preventing danger, which is counter to what we thought the mitzvah was.
It's common behavior in the Middle East for houses of most people to be only one story, and access to the roof was common and was needed because frequently people would sleep out there, especially in hot weather.
Right.
And it was
we
also
see this in the old city, right? You can take a tour on the roofs of the old city of Jerusalem. Some of the best views that I've seen. So yeah. I mean, and again, I'm learning Masechet Sukkah as part of the Daf Yomi now, but certainly there's it was very common throughout Talmud. They talk about uses of the roof for drying fruits, for sleeping, for all sorts of stuff.
well, for drying clothing,
Yeah,
for drying flax, all kinds of products will be up there. But I assume a sukkah, the schach on a sukkah is exempt from ma'akeh,
Right.
because anybody who tries to stand on the schach is going to have a possibility of falling.
Right. If your sukkah requires a ma'akeh, it's probably not a kosher sukkah to begin with. Right.
That's a good one.
Right. Okay, so then interestingly, he continues this, right? Halacha bet, bayit shel shnei shutafin chayavin b'ma'akeh, right? If it's a home owned by partners, it does require a ma'akeh, shene'emar ki po hanofel mimenu, right? Anytime that anyone may fall from it, whether it's yours or owned in partnership. Otala ela being pol, right? The main criteria is if someone could fall from it, not if it's gagecha, your roof in the singular. Im kain, lama ne'emar gagecha, why does it say your roof? L'ma'it bate knesiot bate midrashot, lefi she'inan asuyim ledira. So it excludes from the requirement of a ma'akeh a synagogue and a beit midrash, because those are right. Despite what might happen during a certain rabbi's sermons or certain shiurim where people fall asleep, right? These are not intended as a place of living. Okay, so since they're not places of living, they don't require a ma'akeh. Interesting. In halacha 3, he gets into the height of the ma'akeh and what the minimum height is. And then in halacha daled, look at halacha daled. Echad hagag ve'echad kol davar sheyesh bo sakana v'ra'ui sheikashel ba adam v'yamitz kigon shayta lo be'er o bor b'chatzero בין שיש בו מים בין שאין בו מים, חייב לעשות חויה גבוה 10 טפחים. right? Whether it's a roof or any other place where there might be a danger and a person might be harmed and right, fatally harmed, such as if there was a well or a pit in your court, in your field, in your yard, whether it was filled with water or it was empty. Chayav lasot kuya gvoa. You have to make a barrier around it, a minimum of 10 feet, of 10 tfachim. Or lasot lo kisui kadei shelo yipol ba adam v'yamut, or make a cover so no one will fall in and die. V'chein chol michshol sheyesh bo sakanat nefashot mitzvat aseh lahasiro u'lishamer mimenu u'lizaher badavar yafeh yafeh. Right? For anything that may bring harm to a person, it's a positive commandment to remove that harm and to protect from it, and to be very careful with this. Shene'emar yishamer lecha u'shmor nafshecha v'imo hisir v'iniach hamichshalot hamevi'im lidei sakana bitel mitzvat aseh. And if you don't do this, you have nullified a positive commandment. Ve'avar be'velot hasim damim. And you've also transgressed a negative of do not place blood guilt in your home. Okay?
Wow.
So seems to be a total about face. Whereas in the first three halachot, he was talking only about it being relevant to one's home, right? And not relevant in any other situation. Here he's saying any dangerous situation requires protection, requires what seems to be the ma'akeh. And not only have you violated or nullified the positive commandments of not making a ma'akeh, but you're also transgressing a law of a negative commandment of v'lo tasim damim beveitecha, not to place blood guilt in your home. Okay, so it seems to be an about face. Which one is it? Is it only about the home, or is it really about preventing danger?
I think as far as the parapet, it's for the home. It's exactly as it's written in Chumash. Whereas for the other things, it's it's not the same thing.
Okay,
It's
so
a matter of
Arthur wants to split the difference and say that a parapet as a boundary around a roof is unique to a home, right? Like the Chaye Adam. It somehow marks the home as a Jewish home, or sends some message about the home, whether to the outside world or to the homeowner, that this home has a parapet, it's now a complete home. But, right, separate from that, there's a requirement to prevent danger. And preventing danger is a different halacha, really. It's not a halacha of ma'akeh, it's a halacha of preventing danger, of not putting blood guilt, however we want to attach that to the Torah, or whatever verse we want to attach it to. But it's really two separate mitzvot. Beautiful. The Chazon Ish says the same thing, Arthur.
Oh, good.
You're mechavein to the Chazon Ish. Yasher Koach. Go ahead, Robert.
There's what appears, I think, is a true story that a few decades ago, a woman went into McDonald's and ordered hot coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she took the hot coffee
It's burned.
and spilled it on herself.
Right.
And burned herself, and she sued McDonald's and brought charges that they were negligent because they didn't tell her that the coffee was hot enough to hurt her.
Right.
And so McDonald's had to start putting on a label advising coffee is very hot.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, well.
Yes. And now it's not just McDonald's now, right? The Starbucks cups, all the cups have that. Okay, so the next step I wanted to take here is kind of putting this all together, perhaps, is a really beautiful drasha from Rabbi Lamb. As we know, we're still in the year of mourning for Rabbi Lamb. I think his first yahrzeit just passed. His sermons are available online. Yeshiva University has compiled the Rabbi Lamb archive, some really wonderful Torah there. I don't know the historical context of this. He was talking, there was a drasha given in 1962. He's talking about a controversy around thalidomide, a hypnotic drug responsible for the deformities of a large number of babies born here and abroad. Okay.
Thalidomide.
There was
Okay.
It's called,
Yeah.
it's called thalidomide, and it was given to pregnant women to reduce their morning sickness.
Uh-huh.
And it turned out that it was very, very dangerous to the fetuses. The children were born with
They were
very
born
short
without
arms.
arms, but
Oh, wow.
hands coming out of their shoulders,
Yeah.
without legs, but feet coming out of the
Yeah.
bottom of the torso and other things. It was illegal in the United States to prescribe thalidomide, but in England and in Sweden, it was legal. And
Mhm.
so there was a notorious case of a television teacher on Romper Room, popular show for young kids. The teacher wanted to get the thalidomide, so she went to Europe, got the thalidomide, and used it. And because of her prominence and the fact that of what occurred with her pregnancy from it, the FDA started being more proactive, warning
Okay.
people, don't take foreign prescriptions.
Uh-huh.
You have to be sure that they are certified kosher, quote unquote,
Right.
and safe
Okay, so
in the United States.
However, thalidomide was later used as a cancer treatment, and it was effective for, I can't tell you what kind exactly.
Interesting.
So it had other applications,
Okay.
but not for pregnant women.
Okay, so there certainly are, and hearing that and hearing the ongoing controversy now with the COVID vaccines, there's a lot
Yep.
of relevance to this drasha, as we'll
Yeah.
see. So first, just kind of a nice little Jewish point, a nice little exposition, not the essence of his argument, but right. Remember when the Rambam's prohibition against or requiring that one avoid dangerous situation is based on velota sim damim bevetecha. Do not put blood guilt in your home. The word damim has a dual meaning. If you study the Gemara, damim can also be used for money. And so Rabbi Lamb reads it al pi drush. There is a cry that goes up in our lands. This is the final paragraph on what's displayed on your screen. And it adds up to the words of the Bible. V'lo tasim damim beveitecha, bring not blood upon thy house. Do not subvert life in favor of finances. Right? That not only is it a concern about literally preventing blood guilt, but that oftentimes, right, and certainly this is the ongoing argument in our country right now about whether things need to shut down and how much we need to shut down and how much we need to let the economy do its thing, right? That right. So he says one of the messages is don't let the economic consideration be the driving force, but you need to be sure that life safety is the driving force. There's certainly a lot to say about that. Right, but let's back up to the first section of his remarkable drasha, and he's picking up on the same theme as the Sefer Chinuch, which right seems to be the implied question of why. Why is there a need for such a mitzvah, which seems to be obvious? So he just says, and again, there's no chiddush here, but I just really appreciate the language and the way that Rabbi Lamb frames things. If, as Judaism teaches, man is created in the image of God, if Torah was given so that man shall live by it and not die because of it, if, as the Talmud teaches, he who destroys one soul is considered as if he has destroyed a whole world, he who saves one life is regarded as having saved the whole world. If human life is unutterably precious and unique, then it is equally true that ve'asita ma'akeli gagecha, the mundane and prosaic safety requirements are part of the divine revelation. And it is true that a roof must be guarded with a parapet, that a cesspool must be covered lest such tragedies that we heard of this past summer occur. I don't know which tragedies he's talking about. That elevators in Manhattan must be made secure, even that observant Jews must install safety seatbelts in their automobiles. For if life is sacred, then safety is sacrament. This is Torah and this is halacha, and the laws of Ma'akeh is cut from the same cloth as kashrut, Shabbos, and any of the hosts of other mitzvot. It is this same life-affirming mitzvah which requires drug manufacturers to maintain maximum safety precautions for the protection of the public, right? I think we can maybe update his examples to say maybe halacha should have an opinion about texting and driving. Right? That might be another modern day application of this. Certainly when it comes to cigarettes and things of that sort. Right?
Vaping.
Yeah, vaping. Whether whether that would fall under ma'aker or other protective measures, right? Sometimes those details aren't quite as important so long as the message and is heard in the spirit of what the halacha is driving at is what's crucial.
If a person,
Mhm.
if a person systematically, regularly drives the wrong way on a marked one-way street, does that affect the cheskat kashrut of that person? If that person
You're
tells
not
you,
talking about any. This is a total hypothetical, right?
it's a very small street,
Uh-huh.
but it was established in a way, and I see
Yeah.
people driving the wrong way. And I see people riding bikes and scooters the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I also see people driving the correct direction at high speed.
Mhm.
And it's what do they call an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's just very odd, being very strict
that's an
in one
interesting
area and not
question.
in another.
That's a really interesting question, right? At what line do we say that someone has lost their halachic status of ne'emanut? It would be very hard pressed, I think, to say that any kashrus agency would not hire as a mashgiach someone who drives above the speed limit.
I think that,
I think you'd be very hard pressed.
I think that some of the people going the wrong way were just trying to get to Shachris.
Right. So then again, Masechet Sukkah, we've just been dealing a couple weeks ago with the whole question of lulav hagazul, of can you use a stolen lulav, and that is the classic source of the discussion of mitzvah ba'ba vera, right? If you do a mitzvah act, but do that act by committing a sin to do it, is it a valid mitzvah act or not? The Gemara paskins, no, it's not a valid mitzvah. So to speed, to get to shul, to drive down the wrong way on the street to get to shul, might negate, might get rid of any credit you would have had for davening with the minyan or getting to shul on time. So it's interesting, but at some point there is a line, right? Meaning the kashrus agency wouldn't think twice about hiring someone who breaks the speed limit, but they might think twice about hiring someone who, I don't know if there's a limit, cheats on their taxes, commits fraud, certainly someone, found guilty of violence, of abuse. At some point there is, with areas that have nothing to do with kashrus per se, at some point there is a line. What that line is, I'm not sure, but I think, Robert, you drew your line way too low with your example. Maybe we should lower the line. Maybe it should be a much higher standard, but I don't think we're there. All right, so then Rabbi Lamb continues, and again, just the beauty of his language and the way he ties it all together. We live in an age where the dangers are far more prevalent than in the past. Our machines, our drugs, and our structures are more complicated than ever. The dangers to human survival continuously mounts. Perhaps here the choice by the Torah of the example of a roof as an instance of the Jewish ethics of safety is prophetic. For if society can be envisioned as a bait, a house, then as a result of the technological progress in modern times, society today is no longer a hut, but a bait hadash, a new house in the form of a skyscraper. Our God, or roof, has been raised to unprecedented heights. The structure and complexity of society is continually growing higher. The higher the roof, the greater the descent, the more hazardous the potential fall. The whole enterprise of merely living and surviving nowadays is more risky and more difficult than ever. Hence, the need for more circumspect attention to safety is more urgent than ever. Once upon a time, a man who was trigger happy could kill 1, 2, or a dozen people. Today, the same mentality may be responsible for setting off a hydrogen bomb and destroying millions. Once, a sadist might torture 3 or 4 or 5 victims. Today, a number of them have been responsible for destroying 6 million Jews. In days past, an irresponsible Baal Agala, or wagoner, could cause 3 or 4 people to hurtle to their death because of the mad way in which he drove the wagon. Today, the same mentality placed in the cockpit of a jet airliner can cause the death of over 100 people at a time. Once in days past, the depraved mind with a penchant for illicit literature could corrupt the minds of a few youngsters today. Today, with the television, printing, and other media of mass communication, smut has become a national phenomenon and disgrace. Therefore, the concern of Torah, because it is the concern of the creator of life, is that while enjoying the benefits of progress, we not fall prey to its hazards, whether from nuclear fallouts or food additives, from poorly built buildings or industrial smog, from pilots asleep at the control or elevators poorly inspected. The higher the roof, the harder the fall, the greater the need for the parapet about the roof. I mean, just every example he gives, think about current events from the past 5-6 months, and it's all rings true. Building collapses, pandemic, viruses, and it just so true. So then one final point that he makes. He notes that the Rambam elsewhere in Hilchot Brachot gives as an example of a bracha, right, for a discretionary action which one does, of making a ma'akeh. There's a bracha the Rambam says when you make a ma'akeh, imasa ma'akeh mivarech bishat asiya asher kisham sabtivanu la'asot ma'akeh. When you make a ma'akeh, when you make a parapet, you should make a bracha of Asher Kisham Sivanu Lasot Ma'akeh. Arthur, to your point, right? Big debate within the Rambam whether this would apply only when making a railing around a roof, or if this would apply also if you fence in your pool, if you make on your deck or whatever else. But he says, right, make the bracha. And here, this was not the Sefaria website, but the technology. Rabbi Lamb's, the archive, most of his drashot are just scanned in from the typewriter. So it's the technology doesn't quite read it as well, and I didn't realize that there was a lot of typos when the computer read the scan. But anyway, he says that it's a little bit weird for the Rambam to say that you should make a bracha for making a ma'akeh, because normally Maimonides himself maintained that a purely protective or hygienic measure to prevent sakana or danger does not require a blessing. Nevertheless, the construction of a ma'akeh does require a bracha, for the parapet is a visible symbol and a concrete expression of the total concern of Torah for human life and limb. It is an eternal symbol of God's love and compassion for humanity. For little in the view of the Torah is more sacred than human life. All Torah is for us a source of bracha or blessing. It is a tree of life to those who grasp it, and all who uphold it shall be rendered happy. Okay, so he kind of brings it back to the Chaye Adam. What is the symbolic gesture? What is the symbolic meaning of the ma'akeh being that which defines and identifies the Jewish home? Is because it is an affirmation of our total concern for the safety and well-being of all human life. And so it kind of, takes the rationale that we all generally assume when we read this mitzvah. It's about safety. It's about preventing unnecessary injury and death, but makes it a much more principled action, a much more principled item about expressing our absolute value and concern and sensitivity to human life and making that a positive statement, such that Rambam requires a bracha for it, such that it's something which becomes a definition, a defining characteristic of a Jewish home. And again, I think that the parallels and the applications to the world nowadays don't need to be spelled out at all. It's just patently obvious with all that's going on. Are there any final comments or thoughts on any of this?
I think when one actually constructs something, it has its own significance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the act of building it definitely has significance. Yeah. So there's interesting halachic discussions there also, right? Is it a hechsher mitzvah, or is that the mitzvah itself, right? We don't make a bracha over building a sukkah because that's just a hechsher mitzvah. That just allows us to then fulfill the mitzvah of eating in a sukkah. But here, the very act of building the ma'akeh seems to be the mitzvah itself.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated the comment that you read near the beginning from I guess it was Yerushalayim or Torah Israel. What was the name of the rabbi again, please?
The Chaye Adam?
It was a rabbi that you've quoted before.
Oh, Rabbi Haddon, Michael Haddon?
Yes, Rabbi
Yeah.
Haddon, right.
Yeah.
Where the different categories of mitzvahs themselves are intermixed in order to show that they're made from the same cloth. Let's
Yeah,
that way, if
yeah.
to use that metaphor. But another way of approaching it is that of Rashi, I believe, that it just as at the beginning of the parsha, there is an action which is done out of not entirely, shall we say, pure motives, and then it kind of goes from one problem to the next problem and so on, as you mentioned.
Right.
So also the mitzvah, he says the mitzvah of sending the mother bird away
Mhm.
is a very powerful mitzvah, and it results in the opportunity for many more mitzvahs. And that's how he connects the first part here with the next part, and then so on. In other words, it's not just that we're going into the land and then logically a number of different things happen. That is to be expected. That is true. But because it's haaretz, each one of them is seen as a tremendous gift and an opportunity for blessing as well. But we can't, in a sense, rely totally on that blessing idea. We still have to be careful in what we do.
Right.
And that's one of the overall things that kind of ties a number of the things
Yes,
together.
sure. Thank you. Beautiful.
Hmm.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Next week, I think we're back to Tuesday night.
Oh,
So, so we'll be, as I said, camp ends tomorrow. We have a few days vacation at the beach, and then back to Baltimore. School starts, and life as we know it resumes. So, looking forward to seeing everyone next week, Tuesday evening for Parshat Kitavo. Again, I'll be out of shul this coming Shabbos, but looking forward to catching up with everyone on Zoom and seeing you in person in a couple weeks. And I just should have mentioned at the beginning, but tomorrow Ruth Sager is going in for surgery, so we obviously dedicate the learning we just did for her for Shlema, and Robert has surgery later in the week. So
Amen.
we wish him a
Amen.
for Shlema as well, success, and look forward to seeing everyone healthy soon. Lila Tov.
thank you. Violet, Yasher Koach.
Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.